Hello and welcome to today's Tech Talk, which is going to be about my new 2021 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro chip. It's a bit of a mouthful, but if you've ever seen my other Tech Talk kind of tech reviews, you'll know that I am not one to focus on specs because one, that's not my forte whatsoever. Instead, I focus more on my experience with it and what I like and I don't like as a regular user, I would say. So with some video editing, use of some like photo editing, mainly for media consumption. I don't even use this for work because I use a PC for work. So this is a personal device that I use more for, recreational things. As always, I will have timestamps in the description box below so you can navigate through this video as easily as possible so you can just skip ahead to whatever part that you want to see. But first, let's start with the unboxing. It has such a nice feel. It feels so much more portable, and I know it's a little bit of a boxier design, but it feels so much sleeker than my 15-inch. My 15-inch feels really clunky. So we have the braided MagSafe cable, which is super exciting and it feels really nice. Charging brick. Black Apple stickers. That feels nice. I wanted to continue this tech talk with a bit of a background on the laptop I am coming from because I feel like that will add context to my thoughts and opinions of the new MacBook 14-inch. So unlike other reviews I've seen, of course, most of those have been from, tech channels. So of course they would be sporting the latest and greatest MacBook Pros or Mac devices, I guess. Most of the reviews have been comparing the current generation MacBook Pros, whether it's the 16-inch or the 14-inch, with the, I guess, last Intel version, which is the 16-inch usually, or even the M1 MacBook Pro. So I have not owned either of those. I am actually coming from the late 2016 15-inch MacBook Pro. So this was the, I guess, original redesign with the touch bar, or the first redesign with the touch bar. So I bought it when it was first released and I have been using it regularly, obviously, ever since. It's my only computer device, whether it's laptop or a desktop. This is it. So this is my only device, which means it's my main device. My laptop refresh cycle is about 5 years, which actually happens to coincide with when Apple redesigns their MacBook Pros. So prior to the 15-inch with the touch bar, I had the mid 2012 MacBook Pro, and that one was the version right before they came out with the Retina screens. So this is the first generation with the touch bar, and I gotta say I really enjoyed using the touch bar. It definitely had its quirks, but I love the functionality, and I guess I'll talk a little bit more about that later in this review. Although I really enjoyed the 15-inch MacBook Pro, it definitely was not without its issues. Aside from this weird popping noise it developed a few months after I got it, I actually had to get a whole new laptop because I couldn't figure out what it was. And the new laptop didn't have that noise, but for whatever reason, I started hearing it again a year or so ago. And then I've also had to get the whole keyboard replaced because this laptop came with the butterfly keyboard, which I actually really liked, the low key travel and the clickiness, but I did have issues with certain keys sticking, and it was quite annoying to the point where I actually had to get the whole keyboard replaced. Anyway, that brings us to the present, where it's been 5 years later and I am in the market for a new laptop. And I have heard rumors of the 14-inch laptop for about a year or so now, and I really wanted the 14-inch. One, I was really looking for something a little bit more portable, because even though I do enjoy the screen size, I guess, of the 15-inch, it just does not travel well for me. It doesn't fit in many of my bags, and I was just looking for something a little bit lighter and easier to just throw into a handbag and take with me. The reason I went with the 15-inch in the first place is because back then, with the Intel chips, you had to, if you wanted slightly better performance, you had to upgrade to the larger size laptop, because the 13-inch just didn't have, let's say, the fancy graphics cards or anything like that. So the reason I went with the 15-inch is because, one, I guess the screen size was really appealing back then, and two, it allowed me to upgrade to a better graphics card, and just an overall better machine. But with the new M1 Pro, M1 Max laptops, you can get the same configuration in either the 14 or the 16-inch, and you don't necessarily have to compromise performance. So I'm going to briefly talk about the specs I picked out for the MacBook Pro. It's really easy because essentially it's like the second tier base model. I don't want to say base model, but it's like the second tier configured MacBook Pro that you can buy. So like I said, this is the M1 Pro. It's the 10-core CPU, 16-core GPU. It has 16 gigabytes of unified memory and 1 terabyte SSD. On a side note, prices for MacBook Pros have definitely not gotten any cheaper, although I guess you currently are getting a little bit more bang for your buck in terms of performance and value for what you're paying. Because 5 years ago, when I picked up this 15-inch MacBook Pro, and this had only 512 gigabytes with the SSD, I did upgrade my graphics card, I think, to have its own dedicated like 4 gig RAM. And this also had 16 gigs of RAM, and I think it was a Intel i7 2.7 gigahertz or something like that. But this was about $3,200 plus HST in Canada. And then 5 years later, although I am getting 500 gigabytes more in storage, I'm still paying, I think it was like $3,150 plus HST for the new 14-inch. With the tasks that I do on this laptop, I probably would have been absolutely fine getting the base model, which is a few $100s cheaper. I mean, it's not that much cheaper, but I decided I would just go the next level up just to sort of future-proof myself for over the next 5 years, because again, that's about my refresh cycle. I will say that the one thing that I really debated on was how much RAM to choose. So originally my plan was to go for the 32 gigabytes because the 16 gigabytes on the 15-inch, which again is the Intel model, I found myself running out of RAM with the basic tasks and, video editing that I do. And I don't even edit in 4K. I still do 1080p. It's just by the time it goes to YouTube, I feel like it's all kind of the same. Yeah, even when I was exporting from Final Cut Pro with the 16 gig and I would have, a few windows open, I always just felt like I was running out of RAM and then the performance was being throttled. So before I had seen any reviews, I kind of had made up my mind that I was going to go with 32 gigabytes. But because this is the new Apple Silicon, the M1 Pro, it's just a more efficient chip. So based on the reviews that I watched, they basically said that the 16 gigabyte was a good amount of RAM for the average person, which is me. So I figured I would just save the $500 for something else in the future. With that said, let's talk about what I like about my new 14-inch MacBook Pro. These are not by any means in order, but one would be the return of the MagSafe charger. I mean, I've always really enjoyed the MagSafe charger, but it's not even just the fact that the MagSafe charger has returned. It is that the MagSafe charger cord and the brick are actually separate now, because I found that with my old 2012 MacBook Pro that came with the MagSafe charger, it would fray at the cord, and it was so annoying because everything else was perfectly fine, but because the cord was frayed and it just wouldn't charge properly anymore, you had to replace the whole thing, which was incredibly frustrating. The new version, again, it comes with a separate cord from the actual power brick, and this is a braided cable, so it's supposed to be, hopefully, much more resilient. I also really like how you are not limited to just charging with the MagSafe charger. You can actually still charge with the standard USB-C, which is great because I have like multiples of those around the house, and I do have an iPad Pro, just the last year's model iPad Pro, which charges with USB-C, which is perfect because then I can bring one charger to charge both of those devices. I don't necessarily have to bring my MagSafe charger and a USB-C charger. I could just bring one for both. In line with the return of the MagSafe charger, which is like going back in time to 5 years ago, Apple also brought back some of the legacy ports. So not only do we have the MagSafe charger and like 3 USB-C and a headphone jack, we also have an HDMI and an SD card, which is very exciting. I didn't think I would be that excited about the HDMI, but I like to stream content from my laptop. So often I will just AirPlay it to our Apple TV, but for whatever reason, sometimes it just fails on me. So in the middle of watching a movie or a TV series or something, it will just stop playing on the TV. And then in order to get it back on the TV, sometimes I have to restart my whole computer, which is frustrating and annoying, especially when you're like right in the middle of a really good scene. But that is all resolved now because it has the HDMI, which is perfect because our TV isn't super fancy. I don't think it's 4K either. It's 1080p. So I can just plug in an HDMI cable and then off we go, and I don't have to worry about that connection dropping, which is great. And then the SD card is probably the one I'm most excited about, especially, currently for Vlogmas. I am using this SD card at least once a day to transfer footage from my camera to my laptop, and I am very happy to say that I will no longer be needing dongles for my SD card. Although at this point I'm sort of used to it, but again, the convenience factor is kind of a life changer. I will say the one benefit of adopting to the 2016 MacBook Pro is that I have basically switched over to USB-C exclusively, and it's just super convenient and easy. When I did initially get the 15-inch MacBook Pro many moons ago, the SD card actually broke already on the previous laptop I had before this. So it was the mid 2012 one. So I was actually already using an SD card adapter at that time, so that transition really wasn't that different for me, but it's definitely improving my efficiency and productivity, not having to spend 5 minutes always looking for an SD card adapter. Now, I think it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. The new MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro chip is incredibly fast, especially compared to my previous laptop. It just opens everything so quickly, so seamlessly. I can open, Pixelmator Pro, Final Cut Pro. I can be browsing, through Safari. I could have photos open. What else do I have sometimes open? Be listening to Spotify, and there's absolutely no hiccups. I don't get, the little rainbow wheel of death, and it just is so fast when it's exporting videos. Again, I'm usually exporting only a 1080p video, sometimes 4K, but it's pretty rare. So the file sizes are usually only like 4 to 8 gigabytes, but this exports them so quickly, and it is incredibly quiet. So with my previous Intel 15-inch MacBook Pro, the fans were on a lot. especially when I would be exporting something from Final Cut Pro or Pixelmator, like photos, or doing any photo editing. The fans were just absolutely on blast. They were so loud, very audible, and also extremely warm if you had the laptop on your lap. The fan noise was also really loud when you were importing footage, like if I was importing footage from an SD card onto my SSD or onto, you know, my laptop itself, I would just hear the fan going absolutely crazy. This does not do that. This is so quiet. Sometimes I put my ear to it because I'm just like, how can there be no fan noise? I'm so confused. Especially, like I said, with the 15-inch, I was absolutely shocked if the fan noise was not on. And if it wasn't on, I actually would worry that it has run out of battery. So I just go to check on it, because if there's no fan noise, I just presumed it wasn't working properly, which actually often was the case. But this is so quiet, and I have not heard the fan go on at all. So when I'm filming this, it is December 11th, and at this point I have edited, exported, and uploaded 11 Vlogmas videos, and I have not heard the fan come on a single time, which is nuts. Hello, future Eliza here, because as I was editing this video, I realized I forgot to mention battery performance as a measure of overall performance and why I love the new 14-inch MacBook Pro. I'm also filming this on the, I don't want to say beautiful, but on the much improved 1080p FaceTime camera that's on the MacBook Pro. So before it was a 720p and it was terrible, it was grainy. It's still not the most amazing camera you'll ever see on a laptop, but it definitely is a lot better than it used to be. So I did want to mention battery performance on my M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch. I'll never get used to saying that whole string of words, that it's definitely much better than my previous MacBook. And I'll insert a little chart of kind of a 24-hour look at my usage. So with my previous 15-inch MacBook Pro, if I was editing a video on battery, and that's like from start to finish, so importing the footage, editing, exporting, uploading to YouTube, I would probably drain my battery from 100% to about like 30%, and I feel like just a little over an hour. Obviously it depends on, you know, what kind of video you're editing and how much time it's going to take, but I did find that the battery life was really really degrading. And it was weird because it was strange because it actually had a brand new battery, because when they replaced the butterfly keyboard, and that was done under like a recall program or a warranty program, they actually put a brand new battery in for whatever reason. Anyway, so after 4 years of owning the laptop, I got a brand new battery, and while it did improve performance a little bit, I still didn't feel like, you know, I could get a whole day without charging my laptop. But with my 14-inch MacBook Pro, I am able to edit like multiple videos throughout the day and export multiple videos throughout the day. You know, I'm in Pixelmator creating thumbnails, I am uploading to YouTube, I'm doing some like online shopping, and I still end the day with like anywhere between 30 to 20%, which I think is unreal, especially for such a small laptop. Obviously, the 16-inch is going to have a better battery performance because it has a bigger battery. But for this form factor, to get a whole day of doing all those tasks and still not having to actually charge my laptop is, unheard of for me. So I'm really, really happy with the battery performance. So the last thing I love about my new MacBook Pro is the form factor and the size, really. It is incredibly portable. I'm so happy that I went to the 14-inch. I thought that I would really miss the screen size of the 15-inch, but when I'm thinking about it, it's not really that much different. I mean, there is a noticeable difference in screen size, but I think I definitely would have noticed it a lot more if I was going from the 15 to a 13-inch. I did enable the feature of more space for the display, so it does kind of compress everything a little bit more, so it gives the illusion of more screen real estate. But moreover is the form factor, which is great. You know, I really liked how slim this laptop looks, but I was never really a huge fan of the sharp design, because all of this aluminum is just so sharp and scratchy, especially here where you have your fans and then you have like the hinge for the screen. It's just so sharp, and I've never been a huge fan of that. I really love kind of the smoother edge design and a bit of a boxier style of the new MacBook Pros. It just feels nicer in the hand. It does still have some sharp edges like in the back here, but here around where you would actually be holding the laptop, it definitely feels much more comfortable in the hand. Also, I have absolutely no issues with fitting this in any of my bags. So if it's in, my totes, in my backpack, in organizers. So I love that. I love the portability. So let's talk about what I don't like. And there's very little I don't like about the new MacBook Pros. So one is doesn't really apply to me, but if you are thinking of upgrading to the new M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max, it is something you should consider. And that is native Apple apps versus non-native Apple apps. So because this is a new silicon and most of the apps out there, especially for Macs, was definitely more optimized for the Intel chip. Some of the apps that you may go to use, if they are not native Apple apps, might not work so well on the new Apple silicon. And the main reason is just because they haven't been optimized for this new chip. For the most part, this part doesn't affect me. I think there was only one program that I had an issue using because it was not optimized for the Apple silicon. But for the most part, I'm definitely like all about the Apple ecosystem when it comes to software also. So I use Final Cut Pro, I use Safari, and even some of the non-native Apple apps that I use have already been optimized because the M1 MacBook Pro has been around for about a year now, I think. Did it come out earlier this year or did it come out last year? I can't remember, but it's been out for a little while now. So for the most part, those big named apps have already optimized to the Apple silicon, but it is just important to note that you might come across one, especially if it's a smaller app, that is not. Second thing I'm not a huge fan of is price. Again, I bought one with my own money, so it's one of those things where I didn't like it, but I spent the money anyway. They're pricey devices, but if you do have plans to use yours long term, like I said, for me, I don't buy a new MacBook every single year. I don't feel the need to. I usually buy one every 4 to 5 years, and that is a happy refresh cycle for myself. I mean, MacBook Pros are notoriously known for being very pricey, and this year is no exception. The third thing I don't like about the new MacBook Pros is probably very polarizing, and it is the static function keys, or I guess the physical function keys. Physical and static function keys. I actually quite miss the touch bar. So the touch bar definitely had its faults, as I mentioned earlier. It was really great for certain things, not so great for other things, and I just don't feel like a lot of apps really optimize the touch bar, including Apple-based apps. Over the last year and a bit, I also did notice that the touch bar was crashing a lot more frequently. So when I would try to, lower the volume on something, I just wouldn't be able to unless I absolutely restarted my laptop, which was very frustrating sometimes. But there were some features on it that I really enjoyed. So I really enjoyed being able to actually customize what was on the touch bar to what I used most. And I do miss that feature in the current generation MacBook Pros. So right now, the function row is each key, basically, each function key is set to a specific task, but some of the dual functions that the function keys operate as, it doesn't make sense to me, especially for a pro device. It's like, why do I need a button for mission control? I'm not sure why. Why would I need a function key for spotlight search? These are things that I have other shortcuts for. So whether it's a hand gesture or pressing command and space bar to get to the spotlight search, I just don't feel like those deserve its own button on the function key. So I do miss the flexibility of being able to customize that to be exactly what you want. For example, I really miss the single touch buttons for the backlight keyboard. With the touch bar, I was able to easily increase or decrease the brightness of the backlit keyboard, which now, because they don't have the touch bar anymore, I actually have to select that feature up in the menu bar, which is a little bit annoying. There were also some really handy shortcuts in other apps that I use, like Final Cut Pro. And to kind of get around that, I just changed some of the keyboard shortcuts in Final Cut Pro so that I could have, a one-touch way to trim footage and things like that. But even simple things like when I go to buy something online and I would have to fill in my information, the touch bar was super, super handy for all that stuff, whether it's like selecting credit card information or just inputting all of your Tombstone data really easily. I really miss the touch bar for that. The last thing I guess I wanted to chat about was the notch, because that seems to be, again, another polarizing thing. So I'm going to just have this in its own category of something that I, don't like, but I also don't not like. I'm very impartial to it. I don't really care, to be honest. It's one of those things where it was, yes, okay, that is a very interesting design, but I barely notice it now. And I actually downloaded the app Top Notch, and that just makes the menu bar black so it blends in with the notch. I also have no issues with things going in behind the notch because I don't know, I'm not using programs like that. But I do actually like how you get a little bit of extra real estate because the menu bar is up a little bit higher, which is great because, again, moving down to the 14-inch, I will take as much screen real estate as I can get. But again, I probably wouldn't sacrifice portability again going forward. So in conclusion, my nose is getting redder by the minute because if you can't tell, I'm a bit congested today. But specifically about the laptop, I love it. If that hasn't been obvious this video. I think it is a great size. The performance is unreal, especially for what I do, which I probably could get away with just an M1 MacBook Pro, but of course I had to get a little bit fancy and go for the M1 Pro, again, to more future-proof myself for the next 5 years. I'm very happy with the specs that I picked out. I'm happy that I did upgrade to the 1TB SSD. I always thought the 512 was fine, especially because I do most of my video editing off of an SSD, but it's just nice to have that extra space and I just don't feel like I'm, bogging my laptop down too much. I do miss the touch bar a lot. Let me know in the comments below if you also miss it, or if you don't, and tell me why you don't miss it. But I do miss it a lot. Again, I've made some changes to my workflow with different shortcuts and things like that so that I can mimic having the touch bar without actually having the touch bar, but there are some things that I just cannot replicate on the keyboard alone that the touch bar was actually super useful for. So I guess the question I usually get asked is it worth the $3,500, I think, with HST? And I would say yes. It is worth it, in my opinion. I use this laptop all the time. I've had this for about 2 weeks and I use it, every single day. For me personally and my workflow and what I use this for, I definitely don't regret making the purchase. So that concludes today's tech talk on the MacBook Pro 14-inch M1 Pro. That is such a mouthful. I feel like the naming could have been a little bit smoother for that, but thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about something that I can actually answer, so don't ask me any specific spec things because that I won't be able to answer, but if it's just about my experience, user experience with it, then feel free to ask away. Let me know in the comments below if you do have any other questions or comments or anything else, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.